Good afternoon, everybody. It is so good to be back here with you all today. Yesterday, we got to share the stage with a couple of regulators from the city of Portland and from the state of Massachusetts to talk about some of the lessons learned from those other states as we're building out New York's cannabis industry. Today, I'm so happy to be joined by my partner in crime here, Mr. Axel Bernabe, who's my chief of staff over at the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. Once again, my name is Chris Alexander, and I'm the executive director of the New York State Office of Cannabis Management. And today's presentation is really about giving you folks out there an opportunity to fully understand what it is that the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act did, and what licensing opportunities and other opportunities are going to be created in New York State's cannabis industry moving forward. So, but before we move forward, you heard a lot from me yesterday. I want to introduce Axel and give him a chance to say a few words.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. It's a real honor to be able to share the stage with Chris after all the work we've sort of put in to get this bill across the finish line at the end of last year's budget. I came to this industry a little bit indirectly. My background is in law. I was a partner at a law firm in antitrust and healthcare. And joined the former governor administration as his counsel for health, and I inherited the medical marijuana file, which at the time I knew nothing about and didn't think much of. But as you dig into this, it has a way of really grabbing you, because you start to see all the social implications, the health implications, the criminal justice implications surrounding this plant, this single plant. And so needless to say, I dug into it. Especially the economics and the law side of it. So I'm happy and excited that we can talk a little bit about the economic opportunities surrounding this industry. And then Chris and I connected early on.
Back in the day?
What's that?
Back in the day?
Back in the day. We connected very early when Chris was at the Drug Policy Alliance. And he told me that we were going to legalize cannabis in the state of New York, and I told him he was crazy. I think that was our first interaction. And now here we are together, so it's extremely exciting. And let's just jump into it and start talking about the opportunities.
Absolutely. I want to highlight, folks, as discussed yesterday, we did just have our board meeting, Cannabis Control Board, just leaving that meeting right now. And we'll talk more about the work of the board and how you can stay tuned for updates. But this is all about the opportunity. We're going to walk through the real marijuana New York 101. So stay tuned. All right, so first I want to give you a quick overview of the legislation. We're going to talk about where we are now, and we're going to talk about what's next. I want to really highlight the fact, as was discussed yesterday, that the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act is one of the most comprehensive pieces of legislation legalizing cannabis for adults that we've seen in this country. And it's not just because we worked on it. It's because, again, as I said, it took in and incorporated all the lessons learned from other states and made sure that we really centered the public health framework as we built out the other areas and aspects of the law. We created a new cannabis adult use program, but we also expanded the medical program, which had been in existence for a couple years before then, and really launched the Cannabinoid Hemp program, which previously started as a pilot program and then now has become a full-blown regulatory framework for CBD products in the state, which we've discussed quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. Under the MRTA, a Cannabis Control Board, as I mentioned, a 5-person board was created, as well as myself, the executive director. The position was created by the legislation. That control board really is in charge with overseeing the activities of the office, approving rather the actions that are taken by the office. There's a 5-member board, 3 members appointed by the governor and 1 by the Senate, 1 by the Assembly. Those members have lent an incredible amount of wisdom and guidance to the operations of our office, and have been really instrumental in building out New York's cannabis market. And of course, I'm the executive director. I'm just excited to be here. So, you want to talk a little about the market structure, the market architecture?
Yeah, this is probably what gets me most excited, and I think it directly links to the kind of opportunities we're going to be talking about, because this is a bit of a different market than most sort of retail or even commodity crops that both intersect with cannabis, because it's both a commodity crop and fundamentally a retail business and a branding and marketing business. So a lot of the opportunities we can talk about are are reflective of the fact that the cannabis is as versatile as it is. But one of the things that was important to Chris and I, but also to the legislature more broadly and to the stakeholders, was to ensure that there were as many points of entry into this industry as possible. We wanted to limit the amount of concentration, economic concentration, that was going to be able to be exercised by large vertically integrated players or multinational corporations. Part of the reason that hasn't happened yet is that it still remains federally illegal, and so a lot of the packaged good CPG companies, consumer packaged good companies, are not in the space yet. Alcohol, beverage, they're indirectly getting into it, but even institutional money isn't in the space yet. So you don't have BlackRock, you don't have KKR, you don't have a lot of the big players that you might expect to see in a nascent industry that has a lot of upside, because anything starts and it's disruptive and there's a lot of regulatory arbitrage, you have economic opportunity. So we have a very interesting situation where federal illegality is keeping most of the institutional money and the institutional players on the sidelines. And yet you have a real economic opportunity or potential. So the way we sort of all thought about this was to borrow from the alcohol model and create a two-tier model, which would separate any suppliers of cannabis, like in suppliers of alcohol, from the ability to sell at retail. So you create a really segmented market where you either decide to play on a supply, manufacturing, or distribution sector, or you play at the retail sector. And that changes it. Just think of the alcohol model with liquor stores, the only real mom and pop small businesses left on main streets in a lot of small towns. So when you think about this opportunity, you sort of have to understand the market architecture, the system architecture that was created by the MRTA, because you're going to have a client base, for example, at the retail level, that's going to be a lot of small clients versus a Costco or a large player with a lot of locations and a concentrated retail market. So license types, we're going to talk about. I think we want to spend the bulk of our time on license type so we can describe the opportunity. But it's what you would expect. Just think of a supply chain that starts even before cultivator, excuse me. It starts at the genetics. We have actually a fair amount of R&D that's going through. It's important not to forget that this is a medicinal market as well as an adult use and recreational market. So there is a fair amount of research and development that's happening in the marijuana space, and that's a lot about the genetics, a lot about the cannabinoids that are in the plant, a lot about the terpenes that are in the plant and how they interact with the endocannabinoid system in individuals. So there is R&D, and we have room for licenses on genetics and R&D. Then you go cultivation, you go harvesting, then you get into manufacturing and processing and extraction of the cannabinoids. You get into distribution, same as liquor or beer distributors. Then you break and you get to retail. And in retail, you get to delivery licenses. Can you deliver? How do you deliver? Platforms, delivery platforms, everything you'd be seeing, in DoorDash and all the other things are all issues that we have to deal with as we set the market architecture. Yeah. So we'll talk about those.
And I'll just say, we're going to really dive into the license types so that folks can fully understand, what each of these phrases mean and can understand the full scope of activities. And we'll even give some examples of, the businesses that are currently operating in this space. So.
Yeah, that is the fun part here. Yeah. And then the selection criteria, what I think the legislature and we tried to build in were protections. So if you're going to build a new industry and you have the opportunity to do that from the ground up, what are all the wish list items that you'd like to put up? How would you build a new? And again, I remind you, I come from an antitrust background. I'm an antitrust attorney and was tasked with Chris and others to try to draft a law that sets up a new industry. So I think it's probably the dream job for any antitrust. So I get a little focused on this stuff. But you get to create a new industry. So you think about worker protections. So there are labor peace agreement requirements. You think about environmental sustainability, and you think of reducing economic concentration, because that creates real economic opportunity. So we don't know if the MRTA got it right, but that's the dream and that's the vision, and our task here is to try to implement that.
Absolutely. So here we are. Here are the license types. We just gave you a high-level overview, but we're going to talk about each of these. And so, starting at the top, really, of that supply chain, you talked about genetics, you talk about R&D, which is, again, a booming sector in the space, but that really encompasses point number 2, that nursery license, right? And what would you say is some of the, from the nursery license perspective, some of the skill sets and training and type of individuals who are seeking that type of license?
That's a good question, and I think I like the way you framed it, because in a way it's, who's best suited to enter the marijuana or cannabis or hemp industry? What are the prerequisites? What are the skill sets that'll help you get in? Often it depends where you are on the supply chain. So something like nursery, we have hemp farmers that were former growers of outdoor plants for Home Depot, and they were good at raising seedlings, getting them at scale, and getting them out to a big retail outlet like Home Depot or something like that. So I think the skill sets on the nursery really is green thumb. You have the ability of basic knowledge of some of the genetics. You understand climate, you understand soil, you understand greenhouses, and you're really focusing on, it's almost ancillary, because you're focusing on supplying the market, not getting in so much on the business of making sure the plants grow with the maximum THC or whatever else you're looking at. So,
and I think we're the horticulturalists, those who are really kind of in tune with that part of the process. But then they go, they get their clones, their mature plants, their seeds, and those can either likely, there'll be space for those to go straight to retail, but cultivators, right, who are growing at scale, producing plants and plants that will later be used, one, as whole flower in the market, but also that could be cultivated for processing, which we'll discuss later. But let's talk a little about the cultivator license. Obviously, marijuana, cannabis is a plant that has grown everywhere all across the planet for thousands of years. But there are certain conditions, environments, et cetera, that lead to a more quality product, for example, and that allow for certain growing styles that are best for the types of end product that you're going to be creating. And so on the cultivator license, we have currently 10 companies participating in cultivation in the state of New York right now. These are the registered organizations, our companies participating in the medical program. On the adult use side, that cultivation activity is expanded. And so we're going to be licensing farmers and folks who have the green thumb but live in an urban area. There's not going to be a restriction in where that cultivation grows, as long as the growing facility is properly zoned and secured. But let's talk about cultivation. I mean, to me, this is really one of the more exciting parts of the market, and the thing that I think people really get really passionate about.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. I mean, cultivation is just to stretch the mind on this a little bit, because we're trying to anticipate where this goes with regulations. We're tasked with developing regulation and anticipating where the market likely goes. But there are a lot of different applications for cannabis. So just to run through them really quickly. So from a crop standpoint, from a commodity standpoint, the cannabis sativa plant is also hemp, and hemp can either be grown like marijuana, where you're focusing on the oils and the cannabinoid content, so you're not letting it fertilize, essentially. You're not letting it go to seed, and you're keeping just the females, and they keep producing this resin that is the cannabinoid. So it's like a Christmas tree, and you're focused on that. So you're going down the road of cannabinoids, you're going down the road of dietary supplements and health products, or THC. But another side of the hemp plant is what we've traditionally cultivated in this country, which is for hemp, and is for seed and stalk and fiber. And there's a whole movement, a sustainability movement on the hemp plant, where you have these plants that go to seed, so they have a lot lower level of cannabinoids, but they're 8, 9, 10 feet tall. They have a high cellulose content, they have really strong fibers. So there's a whole movement to start developing bioplastics, to develop textiles, to develop pulp and paper, substitute for wood, much more sustainable, energy. So, for us, thankfully we're leaving that to Department of Ag and Markets, because it doesn't deal with cannabinoids, which is for human consumption. But if you think, starting from there, then you're looking at hemp for cannabinoid content, you're growing for health and wellness products. You got to think of what your ultimate end product is, and you got to keep an eye on all these sectors, because the plants, like the stocky ones that I was mentioning, they do produce cannabinoids. So if you're doing it at scale and you're planting 20, 30, 40, 50 acres of this hemp at stock, you might actually be able to pull some of the cannabinoids. So that depends on the technology, on the harvesting equipment. So, it's sort of...
No, we get in the weeds on this stuff, as you can tell.
Yeah.
This is what we spend all day talking about. But I want to move on to the distributor license as one of the more interesting license types, due to the fact that as much as we tried to align the architecture of this market with the alcohol market, we took a different approach in the distributor tier. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so distribution, and we took a different approach because, there's some baggage in the liquor and alcohol distribution tier. There's a little bit. When you're distributing alcohol like wine or liquor, it's a fairly big, boxy sort of retail object, and so there's a lot of efficiencies of scale. And I'm trying to be delicate about how I talk about this, but there's a lot of concentration in the liquor market at the distribution tier.
Yeah.
So the liquor market's gotten fairly concentrated at the supply and at the distribution tier because big producers, the big sort of brands that you would know, Diageo and the others, control supply, and then they pass it along to a couple of small number of distributors. So what we really were focused on was making sure that the distribution tier stays competitive. How do you get smaller farmers that have access and maybe can distribute themselves to these retail outlets? And so a lot of the social equity, this is where it started to come in. We said if we can get social equity and we can get some diversity in the farming sector in cannabis, and then we can give them the opportunity to self-distribute their own products, which typically doesn't happen in liquor, and they can partner up with retail stores that are also social equity, then maybe you start to get a supply chain which is a lot more diverse than the highly concentrated commercial supply chain in liquor.
You said the key words yesterday of the whole discussion was social equity. I gave this audience and you folks at home a quick definition, and I focused on two words, being access and opportunity. As we go throughout this presentation, we're going to continue to highlight those key components and why it was so important for, in this instance, for why the approach was taken here. 3 licenses that I think are really interesting before we get to the micro, which I know a lot of folks will learn about: delivery, on-site consumption, delivery, on-site, and retail. Now, for most folks who are learning about the space, retail has been the most forward-facing contact that you'll have with the industry. Why? Because that's where folks are going to buy their product. Retail dispensaries are ones that most easily translatable from the retail experience that folks may have in other sectors. The retail dispensary license here, similarly to what we talked about earlier as it relates to social equity, tries to scale the scope of participation of business owners to create, again, more access and opportunity. So under the MRTA, one individual cannot own more than 3 retail locations or 3 retail licenses, or as TBD, in the program. The intent there, again, access and opportunity. We think the retail dispensary, the on-site consumption and delivery, these forward-facing pieces of the market are also super important to make sure that folks who look like us in this room and folks who like you turning in, the minority and women-owned business community are really able to participate on this level as well as on the other levels. But we know that this one is one that's definitely really translatable. These 3 are ones that are really translatable for your existing skills. So let's talk about those 3 licenses: retail, delivery, and on-site consumption. I think what also is an interesting concept, but something that people have probably seen before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the lowest capex to get into. It's affordable. You're going to have probably a rollout of retail licenses, so you're not going to face immediate competition with the entire market being flooded. So you kind of have a little bit more room. I think the retail characteristics are probably fairly standard, but you're dealing with a product that isn't. I don't know how many people are usually selling at retail a mind-altering substance other than maybe alcohol. Yeah. But I think we still have a really big role. I don't want to kind of get into the uncertainty, because this is about talking about the opportunity, not about the uncertainty that goes with it at first. But structuring the retail sector, and all 3 of those license types are in the retail sector. Either you're a brick and mortar retail store, you're a delivery store, or you're an on-site, so you're selling to consumers. That's a whole sector where you're not part of the supply on the upper side of the supply chain. You're down in there. We have to figure out how to keep that accessible and democratic. So again, there are platforms, for example, Amazon. Amazon is the perfect monopsonist at the retail level, right? 60% of purchases in the United States are made through the Amazon platform. So if you're trying to sell in to Amazon, they're going to have extreme leverage over you as a supplier. And if you're a retailer, you're just not really competing. So how do we do that? What do we do to make sure that that doesn't get concentrated and that there are no platforms that dominate that market, that consumers are going to individual retail locations, that it's more community focused or localized? Those are questions we still have to resolve on the regulatory front by the way we structure the market and the architecture. But those would be your more conventional businesses. Yeah, my word of advice, I guess, if you were to get into it, is understand how pot works. You got to get intimately familiar with it. You know, how does flower work? What are consumers looking for? You know, do they want to smell it and touch it? Do they want to, you know, understand the terpenes and understand the potential effect? That's something you're going to have. You know,
right there, and understanding market behaviors. This is a key thing that we were talking about yesterday, and the translatable skill sets that individuals have right now. Current, you know, business owners and future entrepreneurs in the space, in other spaces that can translate to the space. You know, market demand, supply and demand. You know, these concepts that are useful in other streams of products translate over here as well. And so, in the cannabis space, you'll definitely find, you know, desire for the craft or limited type or cool products. You'll find really a desire for different types of products and different, you know, whether it be an oil or a tincture or beverages and food products. You know, we also see those things in the cannabis space. And so we wanted to just kind of highlight for you the fact that, you know, the skill set that folks have currently, that they're currently using in their current environment, are also translatable skills that you can use.
Well, you know, and what you're raising there really is the conversation we always have about ancillary businesses.
Of course.
In a way, right? That's what we call the whole segment of non-plant touching businesses.
Talked about that yesterday.
Exactly. And I think that's a really under sort of estimated potential market opportunity. I think it has the same benefits that we were talking about. A lot of the larger, again, the banks, a lot of the larger maybe marketing companies, and a lot of the, you know, the institutional players that would normally gobble up sectors aren't as active. Everybody's a little uncertain because of federal illegality. So there's space for a marketing firm, auditors and accountants, lawyers, branding. I mean, branding is actually an incredibly important thing I know nothing about because I stick to the economics and the law, but there is a huge movement that follows certain brands and certain types of profiles of cannabis plants. And so the ability in a new market to be able to stand out, and a lot of the large players in the cannabis industry, which again are fairly small relative, you know, billion-dollar capitalization, not multinationals. They're focused on brand building, is my understanding. So getting in there to be able to service people, if you're in marketing, if you're in accounting, if you're in the legal field, you don't have to commit yourself to cannabis, but you could have a cannabis practice. You know, we didn't talk about on cultivation. You know, you want to talk about some of the opportunities. We always talk about for when you're building a grow site and all the ancillary services involved.
Oh, of course, and the MRTA can, you know, also as part of that design of the ideal industry, the MRTA also encourages our licensees to engage with minority and women-owned businesses and to create space for more diversity across sectors. I want to go to these next two licenses because they're really, really interesting, and I think folks don't have a full scope of what they do. I'm going to start with the micro, and you take the co-op.
All right.
Because I know that's your favorite thing in the world. The micro license. Now here, I want to give you all a picture of the micro entrepreneur, the type of individual that we identify or think of when we crafted this micro license opportunity. The micro business is the only license, with one other exception, that allows an individual to have a vertically integrated operation. Now, we talked a little about vertical integration yesterday, and we talked a bit about it today, but reminder, it's the requirement that a person, or the allowance of a person or entity, to participate in all segments of the business: cultivation, processing, straight to retail, to direct sales to consumers. The micro license allows for an entity to be vertical. The negative, or kind of the limitation there, of course, is just we're capping the size of that operation. But we think the micro license is also a great opportunity for folks who are just stepping into the space, learning about the plant, or, you know, just learning how to scale their business. You know, a micro licensee might be a grandmother who makes cookies or cupcakes and is just learning how to infuse her products and then to sell those products to a dispensary where they can be sold at retail. And we see that as a great opportunity, as a great entry point for folks into the market, and something that we're also very, very proud of, because again, we've been focused entirely on access and opportunity. And I think the micro really achieves that. And let's talk about the co-op.
Yeah, no, but I just agree with you. The micro is a fascinating experiment in small businesses. Again, the advantage of not being subject to that two-tier, so you have a leg up, but you're smaller. So is that going to be successful in creating small businesses? That's what we're hopeful for.
And modeled after New York's craft wine and beer space.
Tremendous success.
Which has been very successful.
Very successful. So, and you can imagine it, to visualize what Chris says, you can imagine it as an upstate farmer that has a bud and breakfast business where they have people come over, spend the night, they harvest, you walk through the fields, they dry it, and then you get to consume it because you get to sell to them at retail, or they can pick it up at the farm gate, and so they're a small entrepreneur that's diversifying their income as a farmer. Or it can be an urban garden where you're in a semi-industrial space where you got more than a few thousand square feet. If you want to grow, you process there, and you have like your craft brewery that has a couple tables and people come over and buy or
see the process and all that.
Yeah, see the process, and it's an educational tool. So, but the co-op license is, I won't spend too much time on it because I can go on when it comes to co-ops, but
it's his favorite thing in the world.
Co-ops are the mission. We encourage you to look at the MRTA, and this was primarily, I think, Chris is doing the preamble of the MRTA. And it's a bill that essentially stands up an industry, and the preamble sets out the vision and the intent behind it. And there's a lot about remedying the effects of over-criminalization and the social justice, the negative impacts on communities, disproportionately impacted communities, and remedying those. So there's a mission, there's a goal to try to create that access as part of that remedial kind of effort. And co-ops are a tool in that toolbox, because co-ops can aggregate economic power as long as fundamentally it goes down to individuals who own the co-op. So if you're a farmer or if you're retail, potentially, we have to work on the regs on that, but forms where how can we imagine, so this is a little early, but how can we imagine a form in an otherwise fragmented industry that we've described to aggregate ownership among individuals that are all going to benefit equally from that aggregated ownership, but all have scale. So if there are a bunch of farmers that come together at scale, they can reduce the cost of processing, they can market all together. They have ways, co-ops haven't been successful necessarily in a world where it's large ag businesses that are really, really concentrated, but in a decentralized market where you can aggregate through a co-op, is there an opportunity for business there? So this was one where you need to, be really close to the people you're working with, because you're going to share a lot of pain together, and you probably want to get a lawyer, help you figure out the legality of it. But we're excited about that as a more sort of, idealist sort of license type.
So that's the overview of the license types, and we're going to talk again, about some more features of the MRTA, but wanted to really lay that out for folks. They can start to visualize the types of businesses that we're talking about. And for folks who are interested in pursuing some of these licenses, obviously we're hard at work drafting regulations, but this is the framing. This is the framing, and these are the types of ideas that have been percolating from our perspective, from the community who've worked on this issue for a long time, and what we've seen in other states. A lot of this stuff is mirrored in other states and helpful for your research, and I'll talk about what you can do to learn more, but helpful for your research to also envision and check out what's being done in other states in some of these license types.
And to jump off that, because I think it's really important, because we talk here like we've got it figured out. First of all, we don't at all, and like I said, one of the most challenging things I've ever done from an economic standpoint. I love it, but we do stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, California started in '96, and they started by just starting to focus on the idea that you should not put people in jail for the use of this product. And they tried to, how do you liberalize? How do you pivot on 30 years of prohibition, more than 30 years of prohibition, but how do you start pivoting on 30 years of really focused federal prohibition on this and start opening up the market? And so, they've had growing pains, then Oregon, Washington, Colorado. We've learned a lot from those regulators. They've been outstanding in terms of every time you call them, they're just willing to download everything. It's an extremely collaborative community. And then we're number 15, right, in that sequence of events. We're the 15th state to have an adult use program. So we borrow very, very heavily, and we keep trying to iterate and innovate the lab of states. So it's a
lot of discussion yesterday was that lessons learned and taking what worked and what didn't work.
Oh, fantastic.
So one of the things that we're going to talk about, of course, we've talked about the equity and economic justice woven throughout the industry. There's a goal of making sure that, we just talked about this yesterday, there's a goal of making sure that 50% of all adult use licenses go to social and economic equity applicants. And
did you talk a little bit about how that's defined in a way? Because that is...
Well, we identified the groups. You know,
And
those
you
who've
talked
been
about
just as
zip code,
involved, those who've been just as involved, the distressed farmers, and of course this community here with us today, the minority and women-owned business community. And you know, one thing, a lot of this, as we've said, is in formation, but some of those other broad groups and categories, and particularly again for folks who are here today, you understand that you're part of this conversation. You're part of this movement, and your success in participating in this market make sure that we are successful. And you know, we talked about record expungement a bit, but I want to highlight a couple of things there. And then of course, the community reinvestment piece, where the revenue generated from the adult use sales, the tax revenue, is being reinvested back into communities to generate more economic opportunity, and really to stand up, you know, communities that have been in need of resources for a long time.
In I would say, a very unconventional way. I know this is more about the business opportunity, so we get carried away on the social equity and the redistribution side of things. But if you think about it, it's estimated that this industry could be anywhere from $3 to $5 billion in terms of total value at retail. We have an effective tax rate of about 20%, so you're looking at potentially $1 billion in tax revenue. Now there are some expenses, and there's a sort of waterfall of uses for the money, but 40% of that revenue is supposed to be reinvested into the communities that we define as disproportionately impacted communities, typically high arrest rates and other negative effects of, you know, incarcerating people and ripping them out of their homes. So that is a substantial amount of money. And what's really unique is because the legislature was really adamant that this not be just dropped into the sort of general fund of the state and be used for all sorts of other purposes. It was earmarked and lockboxed essentially to be controlled by a cannabis advisory board, which is created by the statute, which has to be selected in the next little while here. No deadlines. No deadlines. And they will be directing that investment. And so there's going to be a whole back end to this, which is those communities should be receiving significant amount of grant money. And hopefully, like Chris said, those go back into economic development in those communities as well. But slightly off topic, but fascinating.
No, and I think it's apt to discuss just due to the fact that, again, with the intent of the legislation and some of the principles that have laid out, taking those resources that have been taken away, we're developing the mechanism to bring them back in and using them for the causes identified. We talked, again, I keep saying we talked about it yesterday, but it was such a good conversation. But job training, reentry services, you know, community centers, these are all things that we're really excited about to be able to help bring to the state. But yeah, barriers to entry. This is another thing we talked about yesterday, but I want to highlight again. These are some of the key focuses of the legislation, and you know, it's reflected in the license types and the opportunities that we've just discussed. Creating an incubator program to support the development of businesses, making sure that they have the necessary business supports provided by, you know, our small business development groups, but that's cannabis focused. So they have compliance, assistance, education in running a cannabis business. These are all things that our office is going to be working to create and provide to our future entrepreneurs.
And if I can, just because I think this is very germane to the idea of entrepreneurs in this space, or if you're looking to get involved or wondering how or what to look for, you know, it's both a tremendous benefit and a huge sort of burden to get it right. That as a new agency with a new industry with real tax revenue that we just described, you actually have some money. Unlike traditional government, where revenue is usually earmarked for projects and already spent, you know, as it comes in the door, there's a new pot of money. And what we're really trying to be intentional about is making sure that we front load some of that money and we invest it in loans, in grants, in, you know, even before the back end, up front, to get entrepreneurs up and running. So we haven't figured that piece out yet, but very close to me, very dear to my heart, because if we have a model with small businesses and they can't get the capital to get up and running, especially social and economic businesses, or even more pertinently, social and economic businesses that are in disproportionately impacted community, they're disproportionately impacted for a reason. They have no you know, they often have low capital access. And so that is something, you know, hopefully we'll be talking about in the next few months.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to highlight, you know, one thing that you just said in terms of the access to capital being a constant challenge. And, you know, as we've talked about the federal illegality of cannabis and these cannabis businesses, that remains a challenge for folks coming into the space, which is why it was imperative that the legislation make clear that, you know, the types of support that the state is investing in these future entrepreneurs can include capital as well. And, you know, we're figuring it out, but this is one of those key lessons learned from other states. We built out priority licensing. We built out supports in the terms of compliance and compliance assistance and planning and coaching. But folks didn't have resources. You can't go to the bank to get a loan to operate in this space. And so even those most well-intentioned efforts fell short due to the fact that those business owners could not get off the ground. And so again, as we've taken lessons learned from other states, we knew that it was imperative that capital be a part of the supports that these entrepreneurs have.
And that's maybe, oh, sorry, that's a flag and a caveat. Again, I think this is the hub of what we were supposed to talk about. So it's a flag if you're getting into the business. Know that access to capital is difficult. Loans, although we just read this morning that one of the multi-state operators, one of the big ones, just got a $40 million loan at 8%. So the rates are coming in, they're stabilizing. If you're a big, well-heeled, revenue-generating entity, but so that's both a handicap, but it's an opportunity. If you happen to have capital and fit the license types, then you have a leg up. You have an opportunity to really stand up, partner with folks that are in the MWBE community or in disproportionately impacted community. We're hoping that, we've heard that. Actually, we've already, I think, won. We hear, all the time, venture capital comes to us and say, can you put me in touch with people that are from these communities that want to partner? So the fact that they're asking, the diversity, I can't remember the last time I got on a Zoom call that didn't have way more diversity than I've seen in my time in government. Everybody understands that you cannot be talking to regulators or about this industry without being mindful about these implications. And so there was another thing on the capital, but it escapes me, so we'll have to come back.
It's all right. It's all right. The last thing I want to highlight on this side in terms of addressing some of these barriers to entry, blocking monopolization, creating multiple opportunities for access. Again and again, I continue to stress this because I think as all the entrepreneurs in the space continue to grow in excitement as we continue to roll this out, continue to explore the different opportunities in both the licensing, permitting, and the ancillary business sector.
And you reminded me what my second point on capital was. Thank you. Which is the ancillary businesses. The restrictions and the restraints on capital and banking and availability of loans is for plant-touching businesses for the most part. So if you're in the business of HVACs or water irrigation or lighting, and you're looking at grows that are going to pop up, again, because it's decentralized, you're going to have a lot of grows. Probably not the most efficient thing, meaning it'd be more efficient to have 2 million square feet of indoor grow run by one person, but we're going to try to break that up a little bit. So you're going to have a lot of potential clients all looking for lighting, all looking for HVAC, all looking for irrigation. There's an opportunity there, and you won't suffer the same sort of prohibitions on access to cannabis because you're not plant touching. It's called, you're not a direct marijuana related business. So it's,
all right. All right. I want to highlight a couple of things that I'm super proud of in this legislation. I know we're, they're not necessarily tied to the business, but an important component as well. And I know that folks who are in this room and viewing us at home are also interested in asking the question. Federal illegality stays in place. When we legalized in New York, did we also address the fact that so many of our neighbors and friends and family members were impacted by prohibition and its enforcement? The answer is absolutely we did. In fact, over 200,000 people in the state of New York have already had their criminal records, marijuana-related charges on those criminal records expunged, and another almost 200,000 are in the process of having those records expunged. And that expungement in the state of New York did not even exist until the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act created it. And so we are super proud that we are taking these steps together. Other jurisdictions did not take this action on the record expungement at the same time as creating the licensing opportunities. But we're understanding that these things go hand in hand. We can't have a state where folks are making money off of, a plant that was previously illegal while folks are, being saddled with a criminal record that inhibits their ability to get a job or access, public housing or, get a loan. And so we are really excited and proud of that being a part of this effort.
And it's an economic development initiative in and of itself. When you think of those numbers, when you think of the impact that Chris just mentioned on an individual's ability to get money, to get housing, to get a job, the ability to expunge those kind of numbers is in and of itself, I think, a stimulus, in and of itself just a freeing force. And then you add on top of that the MRTA actually has an extra priority applicant, so applicants for licensing, there's a category that's extra priority. So if you are one of these folks, that has been impacted that has been arrested, or someone in your family has been arrested or convicted for a marijuana-related conviction, you will get extra priority potentially in the various license types. So that's sort of using and tying this to the opportunity.
It's the next step. All right, and so this is an important discussion. We're coming up on the end of the year, and a lot of folks are looking, where can I start my business? Where is a safe jurisdiction that has not rejected, or at least momentarily rejected, retail and on-site consumption activities? The local opt-out is a provision that's been consistent across states who've moved to end prohibition in their state. Is an opportunity for municipalities, localities in different states at different levels to reject operations in their jurisdiction. On the MRTA side in New York, though that opt-out only occurs at the locality level, towns, city, villages, and they're only opting out, as I said, on the retail or on-site consumption activities. They cannot opt out of legalization as a whole, or out of, should the area be properly zoned for cultivation. The reason I want to highlight this, because we want to make sure that folks are able to use our resource. We just announced today that we will be publishing the list of municipalities that have opted out in the new year, soon after the December 31st deadline. So tune into our office if you're looking at a town, city, or village that you want to open up a business in, or dispensary or on-site consumption business in the future. Tune into our website, check out those locations in the early part of the new year, so you can get an idea of what's good to go and what's not.
And spoiler alert, right? None of the big cities have opted out. We have about just under 30% opt out at this point. And opt out doesn't mean eternally, but in the initial influx of businesses looking for places to set up, it's going to send a bit of a signal. But the large cities haven't. For the most part, it's towns that are up around 30%. Cities are in the single digits, and villages are kind of in between. We'll probably have a bit of a spike, but that's still below 50%, significantly below. And from a population standpoint, I can't wait to get those numbers. But I suspect the vast majority of folks in the state are going to be in jurisdictions.
And the part I love to add is that folks can come on back anytime.
Anytime, you're always welcome.
You can opt back in at any time. Okay, and then on the local level, as you're again looking for locations to site businesses, same time, place, and manner restrictions and ability of localities to provide those restrictions are in place, and the distance requirement from schools and places of worship are still in place in this legislation.
Yeah, so nothing too close to kids, nothing too close to churches and synagogues, and keep in mind that the localities do have time, place, and manner restrictions, so they'll probably have ordinances. If you're going to do extraction in a micro business, for example, and you're going to have some light industrial machinery, you'll likely be put off of Main Street. So if you're trying to sell like the craft beer market, you often find these distilleries are sort of not on Main Street.
Yeah. Okay. Skip that part?
I think we're going to skip the tax part.
Yeah.
We'll put everyone to sleep.
Yeah, public health provisions, as discussed, this is a 21 and over program, right? So again, as you're thinking about your business, folks that you're selling to, same as alcohol, 21 and over with checking licenses. And actually one thing that I'd like to bring up is, during the fight to get here, building out a statewide campaign and talking to the PTAs and all the folks who were initially frustrated with the effort and not interested in having a conversation with me, we just kept reminding them that this was the best way to reduce youth access by creating a regulatory structure where folks had to check IDs. And I thought that was a really important piece of the discussion, but something that we are really focused on as well. And there will be consequences for licensees who don't honor that.
And I can't not put in a couple words on this, because my background is in public health, as I said. So, and that was my role in the governor's office when we were negotiating this. So we were very mindful, and Chris is not wrong. I mean, there's some ambiguity on exactly whether there's an uptick or not when it comes to impaired driving and stuff. But when it comes to youth access, it does look like having a regulated store that cards and that risks losing their license if you sell to anyone under 21 tends to reduce access to youth. And those numbers are pretty solid federal numbers, so pretty happy about that. And also, just a broader point on public health, it is an interesting paradox, and the State Liquor Authority shares it with us, that we have a bill that's designed to create economic opportunity, but is also guided by temperance and public health. So the State Liquor Authority, same thing. It's temperance in alcohol consumption, but also craft breweries. And so how do you reconcile the idea of encouraging businesses to grow and sell to people with the idea of not not having everybody smoke weed all the time. And I think the way you do that is you focus on the market architecture we were talking about. Smaller businesses, community-based businesses, rather than large businesses that are focused on that, 20% of their consumers that are the highest return and highest consumers. So we're hopeful that decentralization, that small business, you have larger margins, you don't have to sell as much, you're not as focused as pushing it through, is hopefully going to be that sweet middle spot.
Yeah. For our advertising pros, our MWBE advertisers, just be mindful that there are many restrictions on advertising that are laid out in the bill. Some are highlighted here, basically reducing the ability of young people or the directing of advertising at young people. And there's some other restrictions there that we want to make sure that you all are aware of. One thing else that I want to make sure to highlight for our folks who are interested in cultivation, processing, but also folks who are in the healthy food, healthy market, and really interested in consumer protection and consumer safety, we are implementing some of the most sophisticated quality assurance regulatory standards to make sure that folks know the products they're putting into their bodies. Again, another benefit of regulating this product, and something that we think is really, really important.
Yeah, and another business opportunity. I mean, for sophisticated players, the idea that you have these standards, GMP standards, federal good manufacturing practices at a dietary supplement level or food level, means that you have professionalization of the industry, yet in that sort of decentralized way. So that's a very important part of what we're doing. And I think just your point about the fact that this is a health and wellness lifestyle. I mean, again, we don't want to get too carried away. It's still a mind-altering drug. People use it. People can abuse it. It certainly can be abused. But the trend really is to sort of use it as a supplement, to use it, 50% of folks that consume cannabis say that they're self-medicating with it. So people use it as a sleep aid. I mean, it's a tough line. We have a medical program. You're not supposed to make medical claims in the adult use market. But it is more than just a recreational market. There's a lot more here. So if you're at all interested, it's worth reading up a little bit about it and understanding that it's not just getting high, not just alcohol. There are certain health and wellness writ large values associated with the plant.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, and this brings us, I mean, we talked a little bit about the medical program. We wanted to give folks an idea of where we were on the medical side. Yeah. No, it's fine. It's fine. The MRTA took the step of expanding the existing medical market and the existing medical program here in New York State. Here are some of the steps that we took in terms of allowing whole flower, which was previously prohibited, as well as allowing practitioners to certify patients for a variety of ailments beyond just what was previously prescribed in statute. And so we think, we're taking a huge step to also make sure that that segment of the market is continuing to thrive and grow, but also that patients continue to have the benefit of a medical program that's, it's full on, medical program.
Oh yeah, every dispensary has to have a pharmacist. I mean, every retail store in the medical program has to have a pharmacist that'll cost you, $150,000 in salary and benefits, and they have to be accessible to patients. It's a real. There's a lot of other things we can go into, but yeah, I think it's a big component of what we're trying to keep.
Absolutely. And another thing that we did in the MRTA was expand the Cannabinoid Hemp program and make sure that the oversight of that program was moving from the Department of Health to the Office of Cannabis Management, the Cannabis Control Board. We've just recently issued regulations for this program and begun licensing and processing.
2 hours ago, I think?
Yeah, 2 hours ago. So, we're also really excited about this and wanted to make sure that folks continue to get the breadth of opportunities within all of the programs that we are regulating at the Office of Cannabis Management. And to break down a little bit more, the Cannabinoid Hemp program is all the hemp products that we talked about, the parts that are being intended for human consumption are the pieces that we regulate as the Office of
often known as CBD. You might have heard that, the CBD craze that's kind of happening. But that's a great point that you clarified that because it sounds a little technical, Cannabinoid Hemp program.
Yeah.
But this is probably the least touch regulatory program we have, meaning you can get there are no limits on the licenses. They're easy to get. They're more like registrations. There's still standards on production and stuff, but a lot easier to get in on. Also a good way to kind of dip your toe in on other cannabis.
Thanks for switching the analogy.
Yeah, mixing my metaphors.
Okay.
At least there are no weed jokes. At least we didn't get in the weeds. It's high time we legalize.
Yeah,
that's the one warning. If you get into this industry, be ready for a lot of puns. A lot of puns.
All the time. Here are the 4 licenses that are active in the Cannabinoid Hemp program. The one that obviously is going to be the largest volume of folks is the retail license. people are selling CBD products all over the state. You know, our ask and our demand, really now, is that folks who are selling CBD products are licensed, registered with the state, and are abiding by the requirements that we've put forward in the regulations. And again, similar to what steps that we've taken with the larger adult use program and the steps that we're taking with the medical program, it's all about protecting consumer safety and making sure that, you know, there's a safer, tested product that's out there on the streets.
Yeah, and on that, I mean,
I know this is your baby, so I don't know if you want to say anything before we move on.
I mean, it's fascinating, the idea that you have so many regulatory frameworks. Again, as a lawyer, I'm going to bore everybody here, so unless there are lawyers in the audience, but you know, you have a regulatory framework for cannabinoids that is more like your dietary supplements. So, for example, the retail licensee was saying it's a registration basically. As long as you attest that you won't sell to minors and you do a couple of other things and you pay $300, you're in, you're good. Whereas in adult use, it's one of the most coveted and difficult to obtain retail licenses because there's a lot of value there, and it's an unconventional product. It's THC. That's our market where you have mind altering. But it's a fascinating spectrum.
Yeah. All right. And so here's a quick update on where we are. We didn't get to touch on this yet. We are hard at work and moving quickly to develop the regulations for the adult use program. In the meantime, as we've announced, we've rolled out regulations for the cannabinoid hemp program and begun licensing in that sphere and began implementing the expansions to the medical program that were dictated by the MRTA. We have a control board that's having regular meetings. We just finished our 4th meeting just before coming here to meet with you all. But since October 5th, when the board was constituted in our first meeting, we've just really been hard at work building out the team and the infrastructure. So I know folks, and we're going to have a question slide coming up, but I know folks are really interested in timing and timelines, and my standard answer is really the answer that I got, as we're moving as fast as humanly possible to catch up.
Yeah. Turns out that a startup in government takes a little more work than you'd anticipate.
A little bit, exactly.
Office space, hires.
So much HR.
We are experts, by the way, if anybody wants to talk to us after the show about civil service jobs.
Yep. And we are hiring, so we'll talk about that as well.
True. We are hiring.
What's next? We are continuing, as I said, to develop regulations to meet with stakeholders in the future business community of the New York's cannabis industry. So to folks listening in, we encourage you to reach out to the office. You know, we'd love to hear from you and learn about, you know, the type of business you're looking to create. You know, as we develop these regulations, it's great to get us some insight into what the future entrepreneurs in the space are intending on and how they would like to participate. We're having our open meetings. Folks are urged to join in virtually for now, due to COVID reasons. But cannabis.ny.gov is our website. Please tune in to our board meetings. You can access them from that website, but also sign up for updates on that website. Can I
put not to put too fine a point on it, but on the regulatory process that Chris mentioned, this is really an opportunity more than anywhere else, you know, to input and to have a say on how things should be rolled out and how we should be looking at things. Traditionally, regulations are marginal changes to existing laws that have been around for years and years. These first the first big regulation packages that the office will be issuing are really going to implement the MRTA. And the MRTA gives us the kind of architecture we described, which is very large. You know, the 2-tier system. After that, how many licenses? How big are they? What can they do? You know, can this type of license sell to this type of license? What kind of loans? All that really does get implemented through the regulations. So be on the lookout for that. And frankly, we hear a lot about people rushing out and hiring attorneys and hiring consultants because they think they need to spend the money now in order to be ready to apply for the license. There's going to be regulations that come out, and the regulations have to go through this regulatory public comment period. And that's going to take 5 months. That's just by law. It'll take that much time. So when the regs come out, you have a sense, and then you have time to get in. Oh, we're getting a big times up flashing light.
But stay updated. This is the site to go on. Go sign in for updates. We're going to continue to roll out information and to keep this program moving. So without any more, I just want to say thank you all, and hopefully gave you a good overview of what you can expect next from the Office of Cannabis Management.
And sorry we didn't have questions. We weren't allowed to have questions, or I'm not sure we built the framework.
Send an email to the office. We'll get back to you.
OCM,
something like that.
Something. Thank you very much.